Thank you, Antia, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to this lecture series. Today I will present this work, Unpacking Coloniality from the South, Gendered Intimacies and Migrant Labor in São Paulo. This topic, I think, aligns perfectly with the series theme of decentering migration. First, because we're looking at South-South migration here, and because we will analyze how Peruvian migrants in Brazil reproduce intra-group inequalities transnationally. So to start, I would like to begin with this quote of from my fieldwork with Vera. I want to share this quote from a conversation I had with her. Vera was 26 years old. She was from Cusco region in the Peruvian Andes, and when she arrived to São Paulo, she worked in a handcraft workshop. And in 2015, when she told me about a conflict with her employer, her patrona, as she said. Patrona is the word she used, who was also a Peruvian woman from Cusco. But at the time of this event, she was 18 years old. So the patrona refused to pay Vera her salary. And when Vera described this confrontation, she didn't frame it as a typical labor dispute. She was really furious. And she told me that she stood up and said, no, you treat people like that because they are from your communities. I am not from the highlands. I am not from the Puna. And I want to pause here in this word, Puna, because it's the Quechua word for the high Andes, the rural highlands. In the photo on the side, you can see the town of Pisac below. But in the mountains, you can see here the mountains that surround Pisac. It's there where the indigenous communities are located. This is the Puna. So around the town of Pisac, as you can see here, you have I think around 13 indigenous communities that live in these highlands.
We don't. I think you are using PowerPoint, no? But we don't see it yet, or at least in Salzburg.
Sorry?
Yeah, apparently they can't see the PowerPoint. I can't see it.
Now I see it. Sorry, it was on our end.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Okay.
Is it working now?
Yeah,
Yes.
apparently it is.
Okay. But I can see you, but yeah, it's something weird with my computer. So I can I will resume. Okay. So I was telling that this is a picture of the highlands of Pisa when we can see the area when these indigenous communities are located. And so when Vera says, I am not from the Puna, she is resisting exploitation, but she is doing it by claiming that she is urban, and therefore she implies that people from the Puna are naturally exploitable. So it's very interesting because she resists being positioned as a docile indigenous worker, and yet at the same time she reinforces and she reinscribes this racialized geography that equates rural origin with inferiority. So this brings us to the central puzzle of my presentation, which is how are colonial hierarchies of race, gender, and geography mobilized within intimate co-ethnic networks to legitimize labor exploitation. So we often assume that migrant networks are a space of solidarity, but research has shown that these spaces can also be spaces of deep inequality, power relations, and also power imbalances. And we will look at Peruvian migrants in São Paulo's artisanal handcraft workshops. Those were spaces that function at the same time as homes and workplaces. And we will see how in these spaces intimate relations unfold, and how these intimate relations came to legitimize exploitative relations in terms of labor. So to understand what I saw, I will in my field work, I will present now my theoretical tools. First, I draw in the concept of coloniality of power, coined by Peruvian sociologist Aníbal Quijano. So Quijano argues that colonialism didn't end with independences. It left behind what he calls is a matrix of power based on racial classification. So for Quijano, race is deeply intertwined with labor, because in this process, in this matrix of power, white labor came to be conceived as salaried and productive. And at the same time, indigenous labor is constructed as naturally inferior and, in consequence, legitimately exploitable. So the second tool linked to this concept of coloniality of power is the concept of coloniality of gender. From author María Lugones. María Lugones expanded the work of Aníbal Quijano, turning to gender, which was a kind of a blind spot in Aníbal Quijano's theory. And Lugones argues that colonialism dehumanized indigenous women. And so while the European bourgeois woman was defined by domesticity and fragility, indigenous women were defined as not quite human, which attributes like being strong, animalistic, and sexually available. So in this process of dehumanization, this has consequences for labor, because for the indigenous woman in the workshop I will describe later, the line between productive labor and reproductive labor, the productive labor to produce the handcrafts, and reproductive labor, cooking, cleaning, caring for the kids of their patrones, was erased. So my argument here is that these colonial structures are not just external macro forces that are imposed by society, but they are deeply internalized and reproduced by migrants themselves transnationally when they migrate, when they go abroad. So this is what we're gonna see further in the presentation. And finally, we'll talk about intimacy. I use the concept of intimacy in a sense of, I understand it as a set of embodied relations and affective ties that connect personal life with broader structures of power, which are shaped at the same time by intersecting hierarchies of race, class, gender, and sexuality. And these workshops, as I said, in these workshops, people live together, eat together, sleep together. So intimacy here is understood as these everyday interactions that I marked by this proximity, but also by these intersecting hierarchies of class, in my case, fundamentally race, class, gender, and sexuality. And to analyze these intimacies in everyday settings, we need to look at the emotions, because emotions like fear, gratitude, affection are not just feelings, but are also social forces that, in this case, sustain labor exploitation. And this idea, for this idea, I draw on the concept of the emotionality of exploitation from Collins and Stringer. So now moving to the context and methods. Well, my research, what I will be presenting today, is part of a broader research project for my PhD on the trajectories of Peruvian migrants in São Paulo. I conducted ethnographic fieldwork and 64 biographical interviews between 2014 and 2016. So for this presentation, I will focus in a subset of these interviews. And what is important is that these interviews were retrospective. I spoke to these workers after they had left these exploitative situations years later. Because at the time of the interviews, a few were shop owners in São Paulo, but a large majority worked as street vendors in the city center of São Paulo. So in these retrospective interviews, my research participants describe their dependent mobilities, how do they arrive to São Paulo, and the intimate labor relations within the artisanal workshops where they used to work. And most of these workers came from the Cusco region. So here you can see this map that shows the migrant circuit that I identified in my research, connecting Cusco and specifically the town of Pisac to São Paulo, in a migrant circuit of circulation of handcrafts, and where these workshops that originally were located in Cusco progress during time were relocated to São Paulo. So these workers, most of them came from the Cusco region. They traveled by land to São Paulo to work in these workshops, and their mobility was organized by their patrones. And I will come back to this in a moment. And they were young, between 22 and 40 years old, and mostly from working class and peasant backgrounds. Yeah, this is the a better look of the migrants here, but I will describe today. So a word, because this is a series about decentering migration, so I must speak a bit about my positionality. I'm a Peruvian sociologist, so navigating this research required managing this insider-outsider status in a very fluid way. I was an insider in the sense that I am Peruvian, and I was a young student woman at the time, and that created a proximity with my research participants. But at the same time, I am from Lima, the capital of Peru, not from the provinces, and I don't speak Quechua, which is a language that is broadly speak, especially in rural Cusco. So these elements of class and geography also created distance that I had to navigate during my fieldwork. And a note also on language, because I use the terms that my interlocutors used. That is the term patron. I do not use employer because patron carries a heavy colonial weight. It's really loaded with this figure of domination, and so I prefer to keep this term because it conveys an image that the term employer, that is more neutral, does not convey. And I use also the term of funcionário. Funcionário is the Portuguese word for employee. So it's interesting because workers use this term to define their situation, but funcionário implies, at least ideally, a regular formal employment. But in fact, in the case of my research participants, the reality was informal and precarious working conditions. So I use these terms to describe what I call the patron funcionario domination. And I keep these categories because I think there are this is a choice that I think is more relevant to understand the nuances of the relationship between patrones and funcionarios. Let's look at the data now. So how this exploitation happened? First, we have the process of recruitment that was organized through what I call a dependent mobility. And this process of recruitment, we can call it a transnational enganche. Enganche was a historical system of death bondage in Peru. And this, the transnational enganche that happens today has quite a lot of similarities with this old recruitment method from the time of the hacienda in Peru. So recruitment happens through extended family networks, but also fictive kinship relations. So my interlocutors were recruited by godmothers, distant aunts, neighbors, and people they trusted, and very often people they respected. But this recruitment is deeply classed and racialized because patrones are often upwardly mobile migrants, and they specifically target people from the rural highlands, the Puna, because in this colonial imaginary, the Puna equals exploitable. But what is interesting here is also that in Peru, racial hierarchies are articulated not only through phenotype, but also through a range of spatial and cultural signifiers. So we have geographical origin, the fact that being from an urban district or a rural district changes a lot, but also educational level as a marker of class and acculturation, dress styles, language use, the fact that speak a good Spanish or also speak Quechua, those are also social markers through which racialization operates. And once this recruitment phase took place and workers arrived in São Paulo, in the workshop, there was no boundaries between life and work, and there was no private space or private life. And there is a surveillance practice that is put in place to restrict mobility of the workers, but also to ensure the productivity of the handcraft workshop. So, and here the concept of coloniality of gender is very important, because in these workshops, patronas feel entitled to control bodies and sexuality of women. So, for instance, take the case of Griselda, a 27-year-old woman from Puno in the south of Peru. Her patrona forbade her from going out, telling her it's very dangerous, it's for your own good. So this language of care, in fact, instill fear of the hostile city of São Paulo. But through this language, patrones ensure that women remain dependent. And when women try to complain, they are treated like children. Vera, the woman from my first slide, was told, "You are too spoiled," when she asked for her salary, for instance. So this instrumentalization reinforces the hierarchy. The patrona is the adult and the indigenous worker is the child. But there is also this control extends to the romantic and reproductive life of this woman. So we can see a process of policing sexuality and romantic relationships. For instance, Claudia, who started dating a co-worker, in her case, the patrona harassed them, spread rumors in the workshop, and eventually fired her, putting her on a bus back to Cusco. Griselda was told, for instance, that she couldn't leave this work because at the time she also cared for the patrona's baby. So the patrona tell her, "Oh, don't go, the baby will suffer." So weaponizing her caregiving role. And Vera's patrona, for instance, also tried to turn her husband against her by spreading lies and rumors about her past in Peru. So all these examples show that intimate, romantic, and reproductive lives are under the control of patrones, and for this, the concept of the coloniality of gender is very, very useful. So this brings me to my next concept, the idea of affective contracts. It's the concept for me, it emerged from the data of my field work. How is exploitation sustained, and sometimes for long periods? How can we understand this social process? On the one hand, migrants are certainly in precarious situation as irregularized migrants, and the fact that there are dependent mobilities put in place make that they are economically dependent on their patrones. But there is not only the economic dependency, there are other mechanisms that sustain this control and these situations. And for me, one of the key mechanisms is intimacy. So this is why I propose the concept of affective contracts that I understand as a set of obligations to perform deference, display loyalty, and express gratitude that are rooted in colonial script of paternalism and hierarchies. It's interesting because in the workshop, patrones use a language of kinship, calling their funcionarios son or daughter to legitimize their actions, particularly along the racial and class lines. So this is very interesting because we can draw a parallel with the literature on domestic work, care work, and other kind of live-in arrangements for migrants work. This literature shows that these arrangements blur the lines between family, personal, and work life and create mechanisms of control, but at the same time, complex affective ties. So with this idea of affective contract, I want to insist on the fact that there is a process of co-production of this relationship. And these two examples, I think, show this process very well. For instance, Miguel was a migrant from Huancavelica, and in the interview, she told me that basically at the time when he was recruited, she did everything in the workshop, produced the jewelry and the handicrafts there on the same time, clean the house, care for the kids of the patrones, etc. And when I asked him, so basically you did everything, and he told me, I did it because I wanted to. Like I said, I am someone who likes to help so that I can also earn certain level of respect, you know. I didn't do it because I was forced to. I wanted to win over people's trust and affection. So in this quote, we see that there is Miguel is really engaged in this process of earning trust, earning affection, and he is accepting this this working condition that he's not framing at all as exploitation. And the case of Johnny also goes in the same way, because in the case of Johnny, he told me that he worked 14 hours a day, that he was underpaid and exploited. His boss broke every promise. He didn't pay what he was supposed to pay, and yet Johnny told me, my boss, he grew very fond of me. In Spanish, the expression is "me agarró cariño." He grew very fond of me, and he insisted in my interview, saying that his boss was an honest person. So Johnny, in a way, is separating the exploitative system, because later in the interview he also said that he was a bit confused, but because he had the feeling that he was exploited at the time, but at the same time, for him, his patron was an honest person. So this dissociation of the system and the individual is interesting to analyze, because it's like Johnny needs to believe in this separation between the individual and the system to make peace with the idea of enduring these working conditions. So with the notion of affective contract, I want to insist on the fact that migrants are not victims, are not only exploited workers, but also are individuals with agency, individuals that evaluate and in their relationship accept certain conditions also because in their evaluation of their situation they think that these conditions are can enable them to obtain their migration goals. So for me, it's very important to insist in this point on migrants' agency and capacity of action. So we're moving to the conclusion of this presentation. So what does this case study teach us about migration? From this South perspective and the study of this South-South migration corridor, I think one of the important lessons is how to think about race. And for me, decentering race implies understand that how racialization processes operate through different social hierarchies, social markers, and how these racialization processes are always context dependent. And as we can see in this case, intra-co-ethnic distinctions, intra-group distinctions, and process of internal othering that are from the society of origin are reinscribed and reconfigured in a way also in the transnational context. So decentering race implies not only look at what is going on in the context of destination of migrants, but also look at the context of origin and how these categories and these hierarchies move or not during this migration process. Another lesson for me is the importance of intimacy, because we see in this case that affective ties are mobilized to mediate labor control and exploitation in these precarious migrant circuits. So intimacy is also political and it's very important to look at how these spaces that are not usually seen as intimates, like these workplaces, can produce types of intimacy that are enablers of these conditions of exploitation and also the sustain of this precarious condition for migrants. For gender, I think what my case shows also is that women's far worse, because when I compared migrants with the same social backgrounds and the same capitals, and how they went through these situations of exploitation, women took the worst part. Their bodies, their sexuality, and care were appropriated more intensely than men's. And so the coloniality of gender, I think, is a very powerful theoretical tool to unravel these processes. And as I said early, agency exists in these migrants, but it's constrained. So I think that we have to look at the nuances of how resistance can be displayed, and how resistance is displayed sometimes in ways that we haven't expected, or as the case of Vera in my first slide showed, resistance can also look at the same time as a process of distinction and racialization and discrimination of other people. This is what the quote of Vera showed when she said, "I'm not from the Puna." She's resisting, but at the same time reinforcing this very hierarchy that oppresses her. And finally, I'll say that everyday intimate spaces are crucial for developing more nuanced analysis of migration in general, labor migration in particular, and how migrant subjectivities are constructed in this process. So I will leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorena. Yeah, and also for sticking to the time. I'll share here. Let me see how I can. The questions for today, since some people told me that. I hope you can see them. So these are the two guiding questions for today's lecture, which have our very much in relationship with some of the issues raised by Lorena during her presentation. And I think I'll stop sharing them now. You have them also in the chat. And I'll stop also the recording. Okay, so now we have like